Hi, how's it going? Coming at you live with another new episode of Radio Amenti, and I'm so thrilled to be presenting this podcast, Swapcast, with my dear friend, Michael Phillip, who is the host of Third Eye Drops podcast. Michael is a dear friend, and he and I think first connected probably in like 2016-ish. And funny story, when I first started Evolve and Ascend, was just kind of like thinking about who I want to connect with and work with, and had the opportunity to collaborate with my friends Timewheel and their platform DMT, the Spirit Molecule. I remember seeing the Third Eye Drops logo, being like, oh my God, this looks so cool. I want to be on this podcast. I want to be on this podcast. I want to be on this podcast. And I never listened to the podcast. I actually just saw the logo and was like, oh, this looks fucking rad and exactly like something I want to be a part of. Flash forward a few years later, my friend Noah Lampert, who's an amazing connector, conduit, host of Synchronicity podcast, had me on his show. Then I went through kind of like the gamut of the whole MindPod Network crew and had the opportunity to connect to Michael. And it was just kind of like instant soul recognition. I mean, I hate saying that because it's just such a cliche and becomes such a trope to be like soul family, but Michael is that. So, like, whatever. It's true. It's Verdad. Michael is a dear friend, and we have such a wonderful connection. And every talk we have on TED, Third Eye Drops, I usually leave feeling just like completely light and inspired and happy. And such is the case with this conversation, too. When we talked about what we wanted to talk about, I had suggested we kind of talk about like the idea of abracadabra and how as we create as we speak, we create the power of mind into matter. And then Michael said, oh, well, you should also talk about like the UFO phenomena, which we both love. And I have a deep, long standing affinity for. And the conversation mostly became about like UFO phenomena, but not without the exploration of creativity and mind and just how the creative process is such a sustenance for the life experience. And I loved everything we touched on, and I think you will too. So, a little bit about Michael. I'm going to pull the bio from his own website, which is thirdeyedrops.com. So, driven by unquenchable curiosity, Michael has managed to cut through the digital noise to build a significant presence online. His ever-growing show, Third Eye Drops, consistently ranks in the top 10 of its iTunes category, has received nearly 2 million downloads, and has maintained a 5-star rating across over 800 reviews. Michael has released and appeared on hundreds of podcast episodes, melding minds with a wide range of multidisciplinary experts, including scientists, artists, philosophers, spiritual teachers, best-selling authors, and viral personalities. Michael has written and spoken on topics ranging from technology to happiness for outlets like Huffington Post, Medium, and Disinfo. He holds a BA in journalism. So to learn more about Michael, definitely check out his podcast, Third Eye Drops, on iTunes and major streaming platforms. Follow him on Instagram at third_eye_drops. And all the things. Michael rules. We're going to be seeing each other in a few weeks in Austin on July 10th for an event at the Church of the Sacred Womb, which is being hosted by our friend and a kind of a fellow conduit in this connection, Matt, who is organizing basically this event as a fundraiser to bring awareness to the Timewheel podcast network that Mike Brancatelli, host of Mikeadelic podcast, and I are kind of like founding podcast pioneers. So it should be really fun. And if you're in Austin on July 10th, I highly recommend coming and checking it out and meeting with us and riffing with us and just kind of mind jamming along. Also, I'm so psyched that this podcast is brought to you by my first ever official sponsors. So, funny enough, when I recorded today's episode, I was actually wearing my Sheath products that were given to me, a really comfy, adorable red sports bra, and the best boy shorts that I have worn in a really long time. Sheath started out as an underwear line for men, but they are expanding into female territory, and honestly, I love I love this underwear. It's awesome. And I'm not just saying that because I sponsored the show. I really think you'll love them too. So if you go to sheathunderwear.com and use the promo code Amenti, you'll get 20% off of your order. And also, luckily, it's so cool to actually be sponsored by things that you like and don't feel gross, just like promoting for no other reason than money. I actually find them useful, which I love the other sponsor, which is Ohana Kava Bar. OhanaKavaBar.com is where you can learn more. Their kava products are amazing. As somebody that gave up alcohol close to a year ago now, it's hard sometimes to relax. And when anxiety takes hold, it's tough, right? It's tough sitting with your mind. But kava is a really great natural remedy that promotes relaxation and peace and just all around good vibes. So I highly recommend checking out their kava products. And if you go to ohanakavabar.com and use promo code Timewheel, you'll get 10% off of your order. It's high quality stuff, really, really good. Use promo code Timewheel to save 10%. Anyway, so yeah, if you enjoyed what you've been listening to and the hopefully now consistent stream of content coming your way, please take a moment to rate Radio Amenti on iTunes. All the ratings and reviews help us rank a little better and mean so much to me, to us, to the community that's building. I do my best to respond to and read all of your messages on social media. So thank you for everyone that sends me DMs and comments about how the show has affected them. I love it all. The support means the world. And yeah, you guys are awesome. And I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I enjoyed recording it. And yeah, here we go. Welcome to Radio Amenti, embracing the eternal now, where minds and timelines merge, inspiring synchronicity, awakening potential, and making sense of change.
Jen, my friend, what a treat to differentiate from the pleroma with you during this time in the strange thing we call history, which only seems to be getting stranger. And you are one of my favorite people to reflect on said strangeness with. So I, as always, am excited to meld minds, my friend.
Ditto. Seriously, we always have the best time. Every conversation we've had, I feel like I leave with like my cheeks hurting from smiling and just being like, yes, this is
Those
it.
are the best. They really are. And I know that I can't just have my friends on all the time, but they really are the most fun. Like the one I did just before this was with Ramin and Shane,
Oh,
not
wow.
Moss, and it was it was exactly what you would expect. And it was just there, it's the hardest I've probably ever laughed doing a podcast. And I definitely left thinking I just only want to do podcasts like this, but you can't guarantee it. You got to go with the flow. You got to go where the Wonder Wiggles take you. But that said, I know this is going to be another one of those.
Yeah, totally. But it's funny because it sets like a template for how you want them to feel. I recently finally did like my solo cast update about everything that's happened in the last few months and just about how like I've loved all of my episodes so far, but I really want them to stay in. I like that wonder wiggle. Like you
Yeah.
just said, they like as long as they have that feeling where you feel like you've like learned something or like it's tickled your heart in a way, then that's the
Mm-hmm.
vibe.
Yeah, playful but sincere exploration. We've somehow gotten into this weird idea where things are either calcified into seriousness and actual exploration that's worth considering, worth doing, worth doing papers on academically or whatever, or it's just playful, it's nonsense. And I think everybody intuitively understands that that's not really the way it is or should be. It's just these weird established little channels of energy where we pretend they have to be mutually exclusive, but I don't think they can be mutually exclusive if we want them to be as subjectively potent as they possibly can be, because one or the other of those is not doesn't quite do it in the way that joining them together does. And it's hit or you can't, again, you can't orchestrate these things, you can't force it, but when they do inevitably harmonize and overlap, in that moment of overlapping, it's like, this is it, this is
Yeah.
it, silly profundity is it.
Totally. And sometimes those things emerge in the weirdest way, like thinking about like, okay, like I can't wait to listen to your podcast with Ramin and Shane. Like that night that we were all hanging out together in
Hmm.
LA. And it's just funny, like, we were at like this event that was amazing, but also very stressful. But then it was like that third thing emerged and that feeling of just goodness and playfulness and happiness where we could all be in a room together talking, and like you can't plan that kind of thing. It's just like happens.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think about that moment, that Airbnb with all those people there. I can't even remember everybody that was there, but it was so many of our friends. And this was right after one of the Whitma events we did, where it's you, me, Ramin, Shane, Colin, old friends of mine I hadn't seen in a long time. Who else was there?
Matt
Yeah,
from
Matt from
Timewheel.
Timewheel. Yeah.
Yeah, and my friend Mary, and oh God, there's just so many of us. But that was just
Hmm.
like the giggles. And that's the thing that's so exciting thinking about like as we're kind of like emerging from the general strangeness that's happened in the last year and a half, the fact that like we're gonna actually get to hang out and see each other in Austin in a few weeks. I'm so
Hmm.
excited about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I don't know what to expect, like, but I have faith that as long as we're all there, it's gonna be fun,
Totally.
regardless of what's going on. Yeah, and I guess we should plug it. I mean, I will plug it for sure in the intro, but we're doing a talk um at a place called, I think it's called Church of the Sacred Womb,
Yes.
which really it looks like a house, like a nice house that's really well appointed, and they do regular gatherings, and you and I and Matt and Mike Brank and who knows who else are going to be hanging out there. So I definitely hope all the Wonder Dippers whose ears these wiggles are reaching will attend and hang with us.
Absolutely.
But you just, as soon as you said emerging from the weirdness, it, on one hand, yeah, we are definitely emerging from a kind of weirdness, a weirdness of isolation and uncertainty, and I feel like we're just birthing right into yet another wave of weirdness and novelty, because like I just said before we started recording, I was just reading the latest on all of the the UFO disclosure stuff, and I can't not think about it. It's weird because I'll go a day or two, and then it will reignite the curiosity in my brain. And it's a dangerous one because it feels like something we're not going to truly know any answers about concretely for a long time. Yet, just these little nuggets that are emerging now are so much more than what we've gotten in the past.
Oh, completely. And the press line, like the bylines of it are so interesting. Like I feel like, everything, like I hate going into that like conspirituality type of thinking, but it's hard not to like get the Fox Mulder hat on when you're like, oh, so weird. Now, like the fact that they're like spinning it, it's like a national security threat. What does this security threat mean? It's like, what a weird
Hmm.
thing. Like the way, the narrative of it that's spun. I mean, God, fuck the fact that it's like whenever disclosure does inevitably happen, what it will do to challenge like our ideas of religion, the evolution of
Hmm.
man, and what it even means to be human. But they're tying in this idea of like it's a security threat.
Hmm.
That's so weird.
Yeah, yeah. And you know what? I'm okay with whatever pretense we need to anoint it under, as long as we are anointing it as a real thing that is actually mysterious, and we're not dismissing as just a some kind of rare natural phenomenon or weather balloon or whatever, actually just taking it seriously as something, I think is a great first step. It's almost like anointing the value of psychedelics through psychedelic medicine when
Yeah.
we know that there are so many other legitimate uses and so many other ways you can enhance your life and your understanding of yourself and your mental health, rather than just using it in a sanctioned therapeutic or medicinal setting, even though I think those are very valuable modalities. But I'm almost feeling like that in a strange way with this UFO topic, where I don't really care how we get it in. If we get it in, I'm excited. And just if people aren't familiar, there are now all of these famous anecdotes like the Tic Tac UFO, these triangles that were captured, the Go Fast video. If you want to know what these are, go look them up. They've all been, the big difference here is that they've all been acknowledged by the Pentagon and various intelligence agencies. And now there is this unidentified aerial phenomenon task force. And this is the sort of developing thing where this task force was assembled at the behest of Harry Reid, of all people, the senator. And basically, this task force is assigned the responsibility of putting together all of the reports on, unidentified aerial phenomenon. And I don't know if it has been submitted. I think it has been submitted already. And now we're just waiting for the details of that to go public. But there are things that we know apparently for sure already. And one of them is that um, the U.S. military in general, the whole military establishment, is saying, this is, first of all, this is not ours. We're all going down on the record as saying, like, this is not any known U.S. military, you know, cutting edge experimental aircraft or anything like that. So that in and of itself is pretty big. But I think a lot of the other stuff is going to remain foggy.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's just so interesting because when was Project Blue Book closed? Because this is like kind of like the most profound thing of them actually coming public about information since Project Blue Book was kind of like a known.
Yeah. I don't know when it was closed, but I think of like the 60s when
Yeah.
I think of Project Blue Book. I don't even know if that's accurate, honestly, but
Yeah, I think it segued into the 80s. I was such a weird kid. Like when I think back to the fact that like I'm in like second, third grade, like looking at like UFO books and like I remember like being
yeah, yeah,
obsessed with it.
yeah.
Absolutely obsessed. And always like I find myself even now like there's something so I don't even know, like seductive and terrifying about like the gray alien face. And like when I got
Hmm.
the book Communion by Whitley Strieber, I was so young, but like there was just something about that face where I'm like, why don't we get to see that more in movies? Like I have this conspiracy theory that like there's something called like the Greada Treaty. Have you heard of this?
Mm-mm.
So the Greada Treaty, some believe that like Eisenhower signed a deal with extraterrestrials that they'd get something in exchange for us getting like their technology to like reverse
Whoa.
engineer. It's a deep cut conspiracy theory, but I have this ongoing joke with my friend that like part of the Greada Treaty is that like they never can like have like accurate looking aliens in any of the
Hmm.
movies because I'm like why are they all like insects? Why do they all look like
Yeah.
Predator? Like where's that gray alien? Give me some of that gray alien vibe. But
That's an interesting point because our perception of what the other looks like obviously is one of these things that is evolving. Whether that other is angelic or demonic beings or whatever other paranormal beings or aliens, there is definitely an evolution of the archetype of the other that seems to be happening
yeah,
over the years, right? Like
completely.
the aesthetic that we choose for the other, that would be an interesting anthropological study. But the other thing is this idea of, reverse engineering alien technology. That's been a long standing conspiracy theory, obviously, but it might not be as outlandish as it was just a couple of years ago, because I had Jeremy Corbell on, who's the guy who has really been on the kind of tip of the media spear of all of this UFO stuff. He's been on every news outlet imaginable, and he says pretty unabashedly that exotic materials are, we have them. Like, he says that we have quote unquote exotic materials, and he seems to believe that we may even have like entire crafts, like companies like Lockheed Martin that do these, super advanced like top secret government research projects, and trying to, like skunk works to develop, next generation aircraft and stuff. Supposedly these big corporations actually do have this stuff, and he doesn't go hard on things unless he has the evidence and documents to back it up and the sources to back it up. So it's pretty crazy. I mean, we may know things on that, in that direction, I think, sooner than most people would think.
Totally. And I can really get behind that. I did I ever tell you my UFO story?
I don't know.
So in the TED group, you had shared that image of the black triangle, right? And like the idea of like
Oh yeah, yeah,
Vitalik and Ethereum.
yeah, yeah.
So, I mean,
I
now,
should I should I
yeah,
should quick aside, I'll tell
totally.
people that. So I was, oh man, okay, how did this come about? I have to remember the story. So I heard an anecdote of a UFO encounter, and apparently it was I can't remember what it was called, but it was a really compelling one because these people had radiation burns on them, and their car was ruined and whatever, and they tried to sue the US government because they were sure that whatever this thing they had an encounter with must have been some kind of experimental US military thing. And in court, the US, whoever the representative was for the US military, denied it up and down, and they're like, we have no program like this, we have no craft like this. And the way the craft looked was like this black, three-dimensional kind of diamond shaped thing. And as soon as I looked it up, and then as soon as I look it up, the first image you see, it looks exactly like the logo for the cryptocurrency Ethereum. And I was just like, what? This is so crazy, because I've always joked that Vitalik, who is the founder of Ethereum, he's just like this super genius, like kind of Aspergery super genius. And he seems like an alien. You listen to him talk, he has this encyclopedic knowledge of everything. And he has this very strange way about him, and he just is very alien like to begin with. And now all of a sudden, one of the most well documented UFO cases, the UFO, and it looks like the symbol for Ethereum. I'm just like, what the fuck?
Yeah. It's super trippy. Like when I said that cuts deep, because I have like ties to Ethereum because of my former partner and like just a lot of high strangeness. But there's something really weird. Like there's something really weird about the black triangle portion and how it all ties in. I'd love to share like my story with it. I don't think I've shared it on like Radio Amenti before. Talked about it on other podcasts, but I think it might tickle your wonder whiskers a little bit.
Oh, please do.
So yeah, so it really ties into everything that we're talking about. So essentially, summer of 2014, my ex at the time was working as a tour manager for the Budos band, which is like this amazing, like kind of like heavy metal jazz band.
Cool.
And he had one weekend that he was home from tour, so we decided to get a bunch of friends together, go hang out on the beach and like just chill. So it was 6 of us, went down to the beach. Long story short, like we're hanging out there, and at that point I was like really into like the Stephen Greer stuff. I was like super fascinated.
Oh
I'd listen to
yeah.
his talks all the time. My opinion has shifted since then, but at that point I was like super like fascinated. I'm like, wow, this country doctor and UFOs and disclosure, blah blah.
Mm-hmm.
So Stephen Greer has this app, or had this app. It's basically called like the 5CE or CE5 contact
Oh
protocol app.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then part of it is that like there's these meditations, but then there's also like crop circle tones where
Whoa.
apparently like if you go to crop circles with like a high whatever recording device, like they make these tones that are really insane sounding. It sounds like kind of like almost like insects in the middle of the rainforest, but like really weird. So I was like telling everybody about it, playing crop circle tones. We're all just like laughing, shooting the shit. Also, completely sober. So that's another layer I have to add to this, because people can be like, oh, were you tripping with this, blah, blah. No, everybody's sober. So some time goes by and we look to the sky and see these two gigantic glowing orbs appear. And we're like a group of like, other than me and my ex, the rest of the people we were with are like super skeptical. So they're all like, what the fuck? And we see these orbs start moving in this really interesting like way, like almost like two like DNA, like one moves to one side, one moves to the other
Whoa.
side. And this goes on for 15 minutes. And I'm like, holy shit, this app works. And like, what the fuck? Like, I can't believe it. And then I go into this whole like dialogue about like, well, maybe Stephen Greer's right. They say that aliens respond to higher consciousness, and here we are having a great time. Everybody's laughing, playing crop circle tones, blah, blah, blah. So we're talking about this as this is happening, and it literally feels like these orbs are like dancing for us. And as it's going on, just had this like warm, amazing energy, like, whoa, what is this? They're moving for us. This is all happening for us. But then the conversation shifted, and one of the women that we were with was like, well, aren't there different kind of like races of aliens? Like, aren't there kind of like more like nefarious ones? And like my ex was talking about like, we have this one friend who's a fashion designer that claims to be like a reptilian shapeshifter from the fifth dimension.
For real?
Yeah, for real. They have
Wow.
a fashion line called 3 as 4, and it's like high-end fashion, but it's all based off of like ayahuasca and sacred geometry. It's like really avant-garde, but like the guy's a maniac. And he literally will say that. And as he says that, the woman and I both look up at the same time and see this gigantic, black, somewhat translucent, completely silent triangle hover over us and then disappear into the horizon. And this shock wave of terror, Michael, like
Whoa.
shockwave, like every fiber of my being just felt this thing of terror. And she looks at me, she goes, "Did you just fucking see that?" I'm like, "Yes, I just saw that." And we all were like, "What the hell was that?" And we ran off of the beach, scared shitless. And my right arm for weeks was shaking so bad because I'm like, oh my God. Like they were just talking about like reptilians. Was that a reptilian? What was that? Couldn't make sense of it. Then my ex goes back out on tour. So I'm left alone, scared, terrified after being like, wow, I just saw these like two bright orbs in the sky that were like feeling like really like warm and like this invitation from higher consciousness. And then I see this gigantic black triangle hover above us and disappear into the horizon. Like, what does this mean? And around this time, I had connected with Sean Stone, which is Oliver Stone's son, and I wanted to interview him. So he and I like met up in New York, and I had told him what had just happened. And he saw like my right arm was visibly still like shaking because I was so terrified. He's like, oh, no, no, no. He's like, if you look this up, he's like, this is a common phenomena. People will see like these light orbs, and it may be something like a unidentified aerial phenomena, ET thing. But then shortly after, this black budget government tracker will come to see like what made them come. So he's like, maybe
Whoa.
those lights you saw could have been something otherworldly, but that black triangle, that's some black budget government stuff. And I'm like, oh, that's not
I'm
comforting at all. So
I'm glad no black budget triangles investigate what makes me come. I'm probably gonna cut that out, but I had to say it because the way you phrased it was just too ripe. But okay, but yeah, so what was I gonna say? Okay, so first of all, to elaborate, I want to know some details for sure,
Yeah.
but also first detail, explain to people what you're supposed to do to supposedly summon these things, because the CE5 technique is something to the effect of you kind of meditate, right, in a certain way, and that somehow your consciousness attracts these UFOs.
Exactly. It's kind of like,
It sounds so crazy, but
yeah.
but it's one of those things. It's been out there for a while.
Totally. Well, like, it's not some profound thing that Greer developed without the influence of like Eastern culture. Because, if you've heard of like the Maharishi effect, where they talk about if like groups meditate together, then all of a sudden crime goes down. It's like this, new age phenomena. Who knows if it's
Yeah.
actually like really scientifically proven, but it's of that same vein where he believes that, if you get a group together, gather, meditate. There's certain like meditation protocol that he has. Like some of it is mantra. Like there's one mantra meditation where you said like I'm Nama is like the mantra, whatever it means. So you're repeating this in
Mm.
your head, you're meditating intentionally. There's the crop circle tones for extra added effect, but it's believed that that's what will like summon them. And it's kind of like that incorporated with like a remote viewing thing where like you project out into the universe and then go down to your galaxy, then to the planet, then to the state, then to the town. And like you're really just trying to like zoom into where you are so the ETs can find you. I mean, he does these like retreats with it or whatever, where like, they'll point lasers in the sky at whatever lights appear. But it's something like that. And, for somebody that say is like a newcomer, just like had like a radical spiritual awakening or like not really grounding, this whole thing sounds like, oh my God, I want to do it. And unfortunately, like a lot of like the Stephen Greer talks, like the zealousness that he has, that they're all benevolent, that they're all only here to be positive, and that they're all only here to like save humanity is absurd. Like,
Mm.
especially after having that experience with like whatever the black triangle was. But pushing this idea that they're all only here to help us is so insane, because like we live in a chaotic universe, a universe of duality and like contrasting ideals. So if you think of like billions of planets and billions of stars and billions of
Hmm.
potentials, like there's no way that every form of extraterrestrial life is just here to help us.
Yeah.
So that's problematic. But yeah, essentially that's what it is. CE5 protocol is getting a group together to intentionally meditate with this Maharishi remote viewing mantra crop circle
Yeah.
tone vibe.
So essentially it's like, if you accept the idea that there is some kind of effect, like that human consciousness or consciousness in general is an actual force that we have yet to measure scientifically. But if you just take that idea and you run with it, I mean, if you take that idea and run with it, you get an excuse for basically anything you want. But in this instance, you make that assumption that that's a real thing, and then you just use that, modulate that somehow to attract something else that is more attuned to and has a better understanding of whatever that thing is. So you're attracting it somehow through that.
Exactly.
Okay, so now the the actual, like the stuff you saw, how far away did it seem, and like how big did it seem?
Yeah, so the lights, right? So we're on the beach, between the ocean and the sand, just on the sand hanging out. So the lights were out on the horizon of the ocean. So, past the jetty out into the horizon, we saw them pretty
Mm-hmm.
far out. They didn't feel so close, but they felt close enough that it was like for us and within our eye line, right?
Mm-hmm.
The black triangle literally was like right above us. Like, I am the worst with like spatial awareness and like distance measurement, but like the lights were out on the horizon. The black triangle felt like so close to above us, almost like a plane coming into land overhead.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's insane. And you know what's interesting? So you said, was this in New Jersey or
Yes.
was this okay? Because I think one of the I'm trying to remember which one specifically, but one of the famous cases that has now been, sort of blessed by the Pentagon or acknowledged as real, took place in the ocean off of the East Coast in that area, I believe. And apparently that's a hot spot.
Wow.
Apparently.
I don't know if I don't know of that one, but I know there's one of like I think it's called Fort Dix. It was somewhere in Fort Dix in New Jersey. But it was like in this alien book I had in elementary school, but that was like apparently profound one. But the East Coast apparently is a hotbed of it. Like my illustrator of Amenti, Natalie, she knows people that live in the house of Betty and Barney Hill, which,
Oh wow.
yeah, if for those who don't know, the house is in New Hampshire, but that was like a really insane case, which happened in, I believe, the 50s. And
Yeah, it was a long time
long
ago. Yeah.
time ago, they were a biracial couple driving and believed to have been abducted because they had this window of lost time. And when Barney Hill went into hypnotic regression to recall what had happened, it is honestly one of the most terrifying things I have ever listened to, like ever.
Wow.
But yeah, apparently the East Coast is a hotbed. There's all these little hot spots throughout the world. We're having this conversation. I'm staring at a magnet I got in Roswell, New Mexico,
Oh yeah.
like when I went on my cross country endeavor. And like, there are all these places that do feel like either like Martian landscapes or interesting
Hmm.
portals. Who knows? It's very weird.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Well, speaking of Roswell, I mean, that's one that I immediately just have a little bit of a cringy association with because it's such it's like the UFO cliche, right? But there's this insane podcast with Chris Mellon
Mm.
on Joe Rogan's show where so Mellon is a former undersecretary of defense. So he's like a high up person at the Pentagon, worked under, I think, three different presidents, both Democrat and Republican, and he's one of the main people pushing disclosure now. And that interview, I'm telling you, is the most insane, most reputable one that I've heard, except for maybe the fighter pilot, David Fravor, because these guys are, their credentials are rock solid. It takes so much to be a squadron commander of a fighter pilots. And it's not just him, it's him plus the radar evidence plus all the other pilots. But this Chris Mellon guy, like his credentials are insane as a former high ranking Pentagon official. And he was saying, I'm pretty sure, I might have to go back and listen to it again, but I'm pretty sure he was like, yeah, Roswell was real. Like
Wow.
Roswell was real. And you could tell that he was skirting around classified information, but he was saying as much as he could possibly get away with saying in that interview, and I found it to be insanely compelling. So if people are looking for, uh, you know, more speculation, but also stuff they can chew on from a very reputable source, that Chris Mellon podcast is one of the best things
Oh wow. I'm
I've
definitely
heard.
gonna check that out. Because the
Um,
Roswell thing is so interesting to me. Like I love the movie. It's very sleepy and slow, but I also love Kyle MacLachlan and like the fact that he plays with Jesse, which it's like Jesse, whatever his last name is, the main guy that basically they tried to like be the fall guy, like, it's not a UFO, it's a
I
weather
can't
balloon.
remember.
But yeah,
But
interesting.
this is such a fun dippy,
Mm,
and we could probably ride off into the sunset on just this topic. But because it is so fun and there's so many it's still emerging. Like we just don't know what it is.
yeah.
So for now, it feels uh, so hot and fun and novel, and I could just talk about it forever. At least until I feel like it's inevitable that a few years from now it's going to take on some sort of like political or so. Oh, you're talking about aliens, you must be speciesist or
Yeah. Well,
something.
Greer says that
But
all the time. Like, if I catch myself sometimes, I'm like, oh, I'm not supposed to call them aliens. It's extraterrestrials. Aliens, like an
yeah,
offensive
right.
word.
Yeah, this is going to be the next like social justice warrior
Yeah.
initiative is defending alien species that may or may not exist or be friendly. But so maybe this a two-pronged query to potentially move on.
Yeah.
If you had to bet, not what you want, but if you had to bet on the nature of these things, aliens, ultra terrestrial, time traveler, advanced black budget tech, whatever, what would you put your money on?
Oh, that's such a great question. I think, oh man, I have so many different ideas, right? I think it could be everything and nothing and maybe completely different than any of those. But first of all, I don't think that they're what we would loop into like this blanket of benevolence. If anything, they're indifferent. If anything, they're probably like, what the fuck is wrong with this parasite on this planet?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that they're here to save us. I think if any, they're maybe here to observe us. I always think of Dr. Cuckoo talking about,
Kaku? Oh, Michio Kaku.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and the way he talks about technology. And when you think about like, even if there's a civilization that's 10 years more advanced, 100 years more advanced, just the way that they look at us is that like we're like cave people. the way that we use the resources on our planet and energy beyond whatever like consciousness issues we have. So I think there's complexity and layers to whatever these things are. I also really, after like, when I had spoke to Sean at length, Sean Stone, and I actually went to Washington D.C. with him at one point and met some people with him that work in DC. And I do think that there's also like the layer of what the government is using it for, or how they're using it, or what that's a thing that's complex. Because with any technology, when you think about the fact that like we have these incredible devices from the palm of our hands, we have access to so much information, and that's just consumer facing. And even what we have with like all like the face app, face swap, deep fakes, whatever, consumer facing, I can't even imagine the layers behind what they really have. So I think it's a really complicated issue that is simultaneously like wonder inspiring and like amazing paradigm shifting, but also fucking terrifying.
Yeah.
So I think it's good to hold both and all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you won't put your chips down on a thing.
No, I can't. I
Yeah,
think
I
if I'm
think
going to do anything, like it's like the roulette where I'd put it like in the bracket between like these possibilities, I'll put my chip on.
uh
Yeah.
um yeah, it is so hard to say because even if you use use a thought experiment that we can easily this is what I always feel like the only way you can sort of understand some of these, what to us appear to be impossible feats of technology. The only way we can do it is to bring it down. This same thought exercise without trying to imagine higher dimensions. It would be like trying to have a two-dimensional creature that only exists on a two-dimensional plane exist our three-dimensional reality. And I think that this could potentially be like what we're dealing with. The reason, things like this Tic Tac UFO appear to be doing things that to us seems impossible is probably because maybe we're only seeing a very finite element of its nature.
Yeah.
Maybe it would be kind of like if you drive by a deer and it sees your phone.
Yeah.
Like it's not even, like it can look at a car and be like, oh, that thing's moving, and it's moving, and maybe in its mind it makes some sort of non-linguistic recognition of whatever that is running very fast. Maybe that's something like it kicks off in its mind, but it doesn't have language, it doesn't have math, it doesn't have technology, it doesn't have any of the requisite pieces of logic to even begin to build an understanding of what the function of your phone is.
Yeah.
So I mean, like I think that's the level of strangeness that we almost have to look at this stuff with, because unless it is an unbelievably leapfrogged piece of technology, which, just means some group, some other government has completely overshot where the rest of the world is in technology, and they're the only ones that have this, which seems more and more unlikely. Unless it's that, then we're dealing with something that I don't think we can possibly begin to wrap our minds around. And it's, yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know.
No, I really agree. And I love that you said that. It makes me think of the analogy that's often used about like what we can and cannot see and whatever faculties of mind are available to be able to process that information through our like consciousness and language. And they said like when I guess the European ships came to America, like some of the Native Americans couldn't see the ships. You ever hear of
Hmm.
this? It's
No.
really interesting. I'll find a link so we can put it in the show notes. But there was this idea that they said, some of the Native Americans couldn't even see the ships because they
Whoa.
had no visual reference or no understanding of like how to process that information. Who knows? For what it's
Wow.
worth, I've heard this spoken oftentimes in some of the UFO talks I've listened to. Is that like whatever within
Mhm.
our brain, perhaps like you said with the deer analogy, like we don't even have the tools within our consciousness to fully process what's actually happening there. Or maybe we've like muted it down. Like when you think of like, I love myself a good biblically accurate angel meme. And
Yeah,
when you think of
yeah,
like the idea of like Ezekiel's wheel and these terrifying things and whatever
yeah.
else, I mean, it's just interesting, like
Hmm.
mind and
Oh yeah,
matter.
yes, yeah. So I said two-pronged question,
Yeah.
by the way. The second prong is what would you want it to be? So we went over what you think it is if you had to bet, but if you could have it be anything, what would you choose?
Oh man, if I could have it be anything, I mean, my whole like ET Close Encounters of the Third Kind fantasy would be the greatest thing. That maybe they are benevolent, maybe they're here to teach us some like lessons on the spiritual nature of man so that we can become an intergalactic civilization that actually lives in harmony with the world and our universe
Hmm.
and the multitudes of lives that exist within this dimension and beyond. I mean, that would be a dream. I mean, I
Yeah.
fucking love ET and like
Would you so you would choose benevolent extraterrestrial with high technology over something metaphysical?
Yeah, yeah, I think so.
Hmm,
Because the metaphysical
interesting.
thing, I think, which is really interesting. There's something that so like my husband, which is so weird to even say, he has a friend who's
Yeah.
brilliant. Her name's Olivia Marcus, and I believe she's a doctor of psychedelic medicines. And she said something about like the more ayahuasca she drinks, the less spiritual she becomes. And
Hmm.
I found myself kind of getting into that space too, where it's like I feel like the word spiritual has become kind of like bastardized to some ways. I feel like I operate in the space of like wonder and imagination and potential for what exists within the infinite field of mind.
Hmm.
But it would kind of be disappointing if like the aliens emerged and it just became a religion, like
Yeah.
some like metaphysical religion, like
Yeah.
that they're like here with like a dogma, like whatever the alien Bible is. But I know metaphysical transcends that. Like I love the idea of like perhaps there is some learning or teaching that can exist, but if it became like some kind of dogma, that would be a real disappointment.
Hmm. Yeah, and I mean, even the term metaphysical or spiritual kind of falls short because it inevitably means that you're pointing to something that transcends physical laws or is just almost magical in nature. But if there was something that existed that had command over faculties and abilities that we just could not wrap our minds around, we had no reference points for, clearly there would still be some system governing that, and eventually I don't see how that doesn't also just become science.
Yeah.
So maybe it's silly, but I don't know. I think if I had to choose what I would want it to be, would be some sort of super advanced benevolent hermetic sage group or something that has been gently guiding humanity, sort of zoo theory style, with minimal interference, so that we kind of grow up with some kind of evolutionary hormesis, like some kind of you know that phrase hormesis. It's this idea that you need certain stressors to to do many different things, but like, so example, you stress a wine grape tree by introducing certain funguses or something like that. It improves the quality of the fruit that it grows. And doing cold therapy, doing heat therapy, these are other kinds of hormesis where you're giving yourself an acute stressor to gain a desirable result.
Mm.
And it almost feels like that if you have because if you had a race like this, so now we're just going down the zoo theory rabbit hole, I guess, which is this idea that we have a sort of directed evolution or directed panspermia, or there's an intelligence massaging circumstances so that we exist and that we continue to exist. But if you were doing that and you wanted the population to be healthy, you would need to give them considerable tribulation. You would need them to figure stuff out on their own, or they would just be helpless.
Yeah,
It's like what happens when you what happens to rich kids, right? That are just coddled. Usually
totally.
not good things.
Yeah, like I love that. Like the most interesting. minds have emerged after processing chaos and finding order from it, right? Like I think there's definitely something to contrast providing sage guidance for growth. I mean, even if you think of like all these biblical parables of like, oh, you had this opportunity and you fucked up. Now you got some chaos to grow through, and maybe
Now
you
got
can
a
figure it
flood.
out again.
Yeah, try again.
But that's a
Yeah.
great word, hormesis.
Yeah.
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 But I love the idea of it being like an ET, though. I was just thinking as you're talking about it, like this hermetic guiding humanity along. I think I would be disappointed if it was just some fucking like Thor, like Valhalla.
Just hot. Yeah,
Yeah.
just a hot god.
Yeah. You're like, all
Yeah.
right, cool. But like, I don't
Yeah.
know. That's not, I'd rather have like ET or like a little gray alien being like this alchemist being like, yes, we've been guiding you all along. And here's how.
To perhaps lube the lane out of this, but also an offshoot of this. The way that, now that we're talking about these, what's essentially just super advanced technology, the way that technology evolves is just so endlessly fascinating to me because the second a new technology, like a dominant new technology, takes hold, it just immediately alters the way that we human so unpredictably and drastically. You know, like, so we're reading the book Neuromancer right now in the Third Eye Drops book club. And it's this legendary cyberpunk book, hugely influential on movies like The Matrix and so many other sci-fi books and movies. And it has all of these amazing visions of the future, like the way that it conceptualizes cyberspace is really interesting. But of course, it couldn't have predicted the way that things really went because it couldn't predict cell phones, it couldn't predict social media, and those are the currently dominant technological social forces, in our lives right now that no one could have really seen, at least not the way that they wound up playing out. And the truth is that no matter what we conceptualize now, we're just blind to what it's really going to be, because that next really novel, engrossing, catalytic thing just isn't here yet. Or maybe it's in its sort of embryonic stages. But I think that's why we just are always going to be blind to the future for that reason, because until it happens and it just suddenly makes so much sense, we're never going to be able to fully predict where we're headed.
No, and then the whatever spirals out of it, that we're here, technology is evolving, and then social media is evolving, but like the phenomena of TikTok, that like I
Yeah.
have to like mute so many of the things that get suggested to me on my I don't really participate in TikTok. I only have it for like one of my social media clients to help them. But when I get these things in my discover feed of just like people dancing, I'm like, what is this? But it makes me think, like the weird magic of technology. And like, our friend Sarah Zucker, I love her whole idea of like technosis and the mycelia and the way the internet works. And it's like, I think of that Arthur C. Clarke quote about how any advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So it's like funny, like all these like rituals that are happening simultaneously on the internet that are somehow connecting us with like-minded folks, while also like showing us the absurdity of things, and something else is emerging from that, and where it's taking us, who fucking knows. But it's so
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, and the reason, so the reason I'm sort of preempting this question with what I just said.
Yeah.
I'm kind of preempting that I want to ask you where you see things going, even though I think of course it's impossible to really know. But you're one of these people who, for lack of a better term, you seem to be able to envision things better than most people. And I think most people who have that creative impulse and really act upon it, maybe it's almost a way of developing some sort of future vision, because you have to have that vision to believe that you can make a thing, to believe that you can take something from not existing to existing. And I think once you start to develop that and you really get adept with that almost that mind's eye kind of part of what it is to be a human, you can start to extrapolate that into the future a little bit more, if that makes sense. It's
Totally.
hard to explain what I'm saying here, because it's abstract, and it's very, there's not like a word for it that I know of, but I intuitively feel a relationship there.
Yeah.
So is there anything going on now that you're like, this is the baby steps of the next juggernaut that will hide the next juggernaut of novelty that will just hijack all of our brains?
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that, by the way. It is a very weird kind of dance to have done to um, come into like an acceptance of like the madness and craziness that kind of comes when you like can see things before they happen. You know, like the fact that like Bitcoin and everything came into my life at such a early
Yeah.
time, like 2010, and all these things. You know, like there is almost like this cosmic joke of being able to accept that like having these future visions that like are like maybe poking at the fabric of reality, that there people are going to think you're nuts, and then those same people are going to ask you for advice eventually. But
Right.
I do see, again, talking about like Dr. Cuckoo and like what he talks about technology, is that like we're seeing this like the metaverse become so much more micro, and what's happening with crypto, even though it's a bloodbath right now, that always, you know, ebbs and flows. I've gotten to a point where I
Mhm.
just have enough of an iron stomach to go through it. But with what's happening with NFTs, what's happening with crypto, what's happening with like the world is so large, but it's becoming smaller and smaller and smaller. I just think that the technology, how do I synthesize this thought? I think that there's going to be a really interesting divide between those who become that much deeper immersed in this technological world where currency, art, life, everything revolves around a
Mhm.
device or another layer of reality through internet. And then there's going to be those that like opt out of it. And I think that's happening more and more. And I think one of the things that happened with 2020 was like going deeper into the internet, then also like opting out and being like, oh my God, it's
Mhm.
such a circus here. So, what I
Yeah.
foresee is this really interesting divide between those that like opt out and those that opt so deep in that it almost becomes like Second Life in the chair, Wally kind of world.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, I think in its most cancerous form, that is where it leads for sure.
yeah,
But what everything you're saying reminds me so much of this recent mind meld I actually did do with Sarah Zucker. It's by far the best conversation I've had
she's
with her.
amazing.
And where that conversation wound up going, that I feel myself being pulled to again here, is that the meta of what has been happening for ever since we started inventing technology. It was, how do we shrink the space between something I'm thinking or something that I want and making it real?
Yeah,
So, printing press, like language. How do I just get this thought out there for you to understand it? How do I multiply my ability to do that? That takes us to books, that takes us to the printing press, that even takes us to the internet. And now with things like NFTs, with cryptocurrencies, you're shrinking the distance between an idea and compensation and consumption of that idea to new levels. And people who think that NFTs are trivial or a fad are the same people who were too short-sighted to understand that Bitcoin is more than just internet money.
yeah,
Like, look at it symbolically and energetically, the role that it is filling, is, and ask yourself, are we going to stop wanting to speed up the way that we transfer value? Are we going to stop wanting to make it more secure or make it easier to understand? Like, no, of course not. And if these things don't do it, the next thing will. And you should, instead of dismissing it, you should be looking at what role is it playing. And I mean, we even got into the whole like mythological symbolism of it with the whole with I won't rehash it now, but the whole Hermes stealing Apollo's cattle myth and then repurposing that whole thing to somehow turn himself into a god in the process. Yeah, I want to retell the story now, but I won't.
Oh, that sounds amazing.
Okay, should I tell the 1 minute version?
Yeah, give me the Cliff's Notes.
Okay, so essentially Hermes is a baby. He's mischievous. He's already really smart. He decides he wants to get meat, and he knows his brother Apollo has the best meat because he has these sacred cattle. So he goes out and he steals the sacred cattle. Apollo eventually catches him, puts him on trial, and he admits to the whole caper, but he becomes a god in the process. So the act of stealing value and transmuting value through an act that is actually against the status quo and against the way governance is done actually eventually becomes part of the governance. And you know, and Hermes gets elevated to the highest possible level and becomes like an official Olympian god eventually. And then him and Apollo also, you know, no pun intended, squash the beef and come together. And it's like in some versions of the story, that's where Hermes gets the caduceus and stuff like that.
Wow.
So that's clearly what's happening with not only Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, where you have this hermetic stealing of value, you know, jumping over the sort of castle wall and taking that value and repurposing it in a way that is pirated, really.
Yeah.
But then after it reaches a critical mass and it hits consensus, well, now it's official because you can't go against the will of the masses.
Yeah.
So, you know, and that's not, and it's so easy to see with money, but we don't see the other ways that it's happening all the time with technology. You know, it's, I mean, even think about something like the digitization of art.
Yeah.
Well, that's not valuable. There's no way that's valuable. Then Beeple sells an NFT for $69 million.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, it's just that's the kind of shit that's happening all the time.
Yeah, and then everybody
these
wants to
days.
do it. It's the thing. It's like people reject what they don't understand and then all of a sudden want to get on the train when it's too late. Actually, like somebody that we both know wanted to put their art up as an NFT and she wanted to sell it for like $100,000. And I'm like, first of all, you don't even know what you're doing. And second of all, like it's kind of a slap in the face to like artists that are actually doing this right now. So like maybe not. But it's like, it's such an interesting thing to see the evolution of like, I don't know what the fuck this is. I don't get it. I don't understand it. Okay. But then all of a sudden adopting it and being like, now I'm going to use it for all that I think I can get from it. It's like very, very interesting times.
Yeah. So I, you know, I'm not arguing for like essentialism.
Yeah.
Or some, you know, I would get thrown out of like a philosophy classroom or something for proposing something, but I'm going to just propose it anyway, I guess, because okay, fine. I guess I am arguing for a kind of essentialism.
Yeah.
But if I was going to act, if I was going to posit what is the point of a human being, what is its essential function? Well, to me, it really seems like it's to figure out how to make things and use logic, create logical systems, and take those logical systems to continuously create more and more efficient logical systems that can be used in a panoply of ways to advance human life and existence in general. Like that's what it seems like we do. We are, for some reason, obsessively driven to continue creating things and creating things and creating things, and taking these abstract things called ideas and extruding them out into the physical world. That seems like what humans do at their highest, at least, or at the pinnacle of their potential. Yes, we do a lot of other things, but I think every human being that we remember and that we appreciate did that in some way. You know, did they invent something? Did they establish a kingdom? Did they establish an idea? Did they, you know, it's like they always did something like that, or we don't hold them in a high regard.
Completely. No, I agree. And there's something like really interesting about that evolution. Like if we could map it, right? Like where you like have this like profound paradigm shifting idea, it's rejected, then accepted, then worldwide it becomes a paradigm and then it descends into kitsch for the next new thing to emerge. It's almost like this strange I don't know if it's like I would use it as the hero's journey. I feel like it's another map, but it's this weird thing that I think humans are naturally inclined to do, which is to destroy, create some more, destroy again, then turn it into like merchandise, and
Right.
like this
Yeah.
interesting
Yeah.
cycle of things.
Yeah. It's an Ouroboric fractal, constantly just spiraling in on itself and eating itself and birthing itself is what it seems
I
like.
love that.
And y-
What a
yeah.
great image, like the Ouroboros as a fractal.
Yeah. And then it gets cheesy because I guess that would be like the tree of life or something. The tree of life fractal, just the circles,
Yeah.
the interwoven circles.
Or like I said, like before we were recording about like I had the vision of the tree of life being like the Muppets, Nanny as the
Yeah. Yeah.
godhead. Yeah, what better way to take something so complex and turn it into kitsch? But that's
Mhm.
what keeps it
Mhm.
interesting and fun and full of wonder, which is I think the thing that keeps it like I don't know what the word is. There's probably some German word for all of these things, but
Yeah. Yeah. That's yeah, Germans have great
they
words,
really
man.
do.
I wish I could think of some of them right now. Like zeitgeist and whitegeist
Yeah.
and stuff like that. Spirit, ghost doesn't mean like ghost of the times or something. Is that what zeitgeist
I
means?
think so. Like what
Yeah.
a powerful set of words,
Yeah.
ghost of the times.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And yeah, so I mean, what is your take on this obsessive need to continuously create? I mean, what's your take is a stupid way to phrase the question, but it plays a central role in your life as an author, as a creative. When do you remember a genesis point of that feeling for yourself, or is it just something that, like, I don't know, if I've just been in that stream forever?
No, I think it's like a very Buddhist, like without beginning, without end. It's like this infernal hunger that's never satiated. I talk to my friend Richie Brown about it all the time because we go through the same struggle where it's like if I don't feel like I'm creating something or doing something, I feel like I'm dead. So for me, the very central like tenet of my aliveness is creating something,
Hmm.
and even if it's never for like consumption by anyone or for commercial purposes, like I need to move that creative life force energy because it's like the very manna with which sustains my being. um,
Yeah.
and I think, the thing is like there's all sorts of types of minds in the world. Like there's the more logical minds, there's the more creative minds, there's somewhere like in the nexus point between both. But I think even like the most hyper, like I'm not like an artist or anything. Like I think like a creative impulse is really what it means to be human. So it's like
Hmm.
whether you're creating people, whether you're creating an app, whether you're creating a piece of art, whether you're, chipping away at some like woodcut. I don't know. I feel like
Yeah.
the drive to make and create and to like take an idea and turn it into a thought form, and to form thoughts. I think that's really the good stuff of being
Hmm.
alive.
Yeah, I totally agree with that idea that it's a kind of sustenance.
Yeah.
And that I also get really uncomfortable when I'm not doing something to create or just or shake things up or give birth to some idea in some way. I'm completely with you. And I get that strange, like you were talking about at the beginning of the podcast, that you leave with that, like, you when you tend to leave these mind melds with sore cheeks from the smiling. Even if I don't leave with that feeling, I leave with a charged up sense that what I just did was good.
Yeah.
And it's oddly energizing. And to me, that's literally what sustenance is, right? Like, you take in food to get energy so that you can continue the metabolic process and stay alive, right?
Yeah.
And there's something else. I mean, maybe it's not metabolically measurable, but there's a clear qualitative, subjective sort of sustenance that you get from it. It's very palpable
Yeah.
to your sense of well-being.
Totally. And it's the same thing. Like here we are in dialogue and we've created new ideas, we've created emotions, we've created a general effect on how the rest of our day will go. There's something really interesting about that and viewing the world that way as like you're actively creating as a creator of whether it's like emotion or idea or everything, you know?
Yeah. That we did,
Yeah.
Jen Cedini, for 60 plus minutes. And on that note, what are you currently creating, if anything? And what would you like people to do the keyboard mudras for, if anything?
Yeah, so then I get to turn it around to you too, because we're going to do this as a swapcast, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, perfect. I am actually in the midst of solidifying what will be the next Oracle deck that I'm doing in partnership with Natalie. I can't really announce much more, but we got our official deal memo, and I'll have
Oh,
some
nice.
announcements about that very soon. But beyond that, just getting back into the vibe of podcasting again. My husband Adam and I are working on doing a video series that like we might just extract the audio and use as a podcast. And we want to call it Healing from Healing. Which is like so good because it's just about like how to kind of like integrate the everything you learn on the healing path in a really grounded human centric way. Um, God willing, what brought me to LA was for an opportunity that would be a dream come true working with Jim Henson Studios. So, fingers crossed. But beyond that, just like creating and getting into a wave of that and integrating falling in love and all those good things. And how about you, Michael?
Well, perhaps this was an odd introduction to the being known as Michael Phillip. I don't know. Maybe not. I don't know. I don't know what wouldn't be an odd introduction, honestly, just because of the sprawling nature of the podcast and the shit that I think about. But yeah, that is primarily my creative outlet, at least publicly facing, is Third Eye Drops, and it is available on all podcast platforms and thirdeyedrops.com. And if you want to follow me on the socials, probably just follow me on Instagram at third_I_drops.
I love that ASMR. And yeah, and for Radio Amenti listeners, I'll have everything in the show notes. And Michael, I can't wait to see you in a few weeks. I'm so excited.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm excited. Let's definitely pod again, and let's get Adam in there too.
Perfect.
He's such an interesting dude. I'm sure he would be a fabulous addition to any mind meld.
Yes, for sure.